So the Flesh and Blood World Championships have been announced. Day 1, you've got Uprising Draft with some classic constructed gameplay. Day 2, you've got more Uprising Draft for that pack opening goodness, as well as some Blitz. Day 3 has a classic constructed top 8 after all of that. No doubt afterwards moving on to like a Welcome to Ira deck draft or something. I don't know. All joking aside, however, I'm so excited for Worlds because I can't wait to see the first ever undisputed Flesh and Blood World Champion be crowned. However, the Worlds announcement also gave us another little bit of something to sit on until we get to the big event, and that is the reveal of the Emperor of Volcor himself. In this video, we'll take a look at the Emperor of Volcor as well as dive in to see where he fits in the upcoming Dynasty set. Anyways, before we get into this video, please consider subscribing to this channel if you like Flesh and Blood. I make a ton of videos talking about deck discussions, deck techs, beginner guides, as well as videos like this one where we discuss news and lore. Anyways, let's dive into the video. So, the Emperor was announced and the Flesh and Blood community was in a flurry. Twitter was tweeting hard, Reddit was trying to work out whatever detail they could as to what this Emperor could be. And so I formed a few little different theories as to who the Emperor of Volcor could be in the overall lore of Dynasty. So back in my previous video talking about Dynasty, it should be up in this corner, I talked about how in Dynasty, James White mentioned that we would have a new hero, that we would have a new class, and also that we would have an appearance from the Emperor of Volcor himself. Now, I am going to acknowledge the fact that an appearance from the Emperor could mean, I don't know, he could appear in card art, he could be on the box himself, hey, he may even be PvE. However, I think it's more fun to explore what it would be like to actually have a playable Emperor a la Starvel, and have the Emperor of Volcor be an actual hero that we can play. Now, to get the easy one out of the way first, I think he's going to be an adult-only hero like Bravo, star of the show. Now that we picked the low-hanging fruit, let's dive in and see what probably was the most kind of resounding opinion that I read on Reddit, and that is that the Emperor is going to be a rune blade? So I don't think that the Emperor is actually going to be a rune blade, and the reason why is because he's the Emperor of Volcor. So if you look first of all at the actual image that was released of the Emperor, we can see where people may have got this idea. He's standing there, black hair, nice goatee, he's got that headpiece thing that looks so cool, he's got his big long robe, it looks amazing, and he's also carrying a sword by his side. Personally, I think we can disregard the sword because I think that all of the clothes and drapery that he's wearing is essentially just ceremonial. I don't think he's dressed particularly well for battle. If he was a rune blade, he has no armor or anything like that. So yeah, I think it is just essentially a ceremonial sword, but we can dive into this a bit more. So first of all, let's take a look at what the Runeblade class is and why I don't think that it's actually going to be a good fit for the Emperor. So Runeblades are a mixture of arcane damage and physical damage. They do relatively small amounts of arcane damage and relatively small amounts of physical damage, but it is the combination of both at the same time that causes problems when playing against them. So Viserai was the first Runeblade that we came across, the OG Runeblade, and he didn't have any arcane mastery whenever he was born. Sutcliffe took him and cracked open his chest and carved a bunch of runes on him and shoved an Arknight shard in there, and apparently that's the recipe for Viserai. Through this barbaric transformation, Viserai was able to create runes and have some sort of idea of how to control arcane magic, and so that is where we get our first Runeblade. Let's move on to Chain. So if you look at the image for Chain, you can see a lot of runes carved across his chest, and we can probably assume at this point that these runes allow the user to actually tap into arcane magic, however likely that may be in the grand scheme of things. So Chain uses this magic to sell parts of his soul, apparently, by soul shackling, and call Ursa forward in order to help him do his bidding. And finally, we have Briar, who was hatched from an ether egg, probably. So yeah, Briar's a chicken. So, ether chickens aside, let's take a look at what these three heroes have in common and why I don't think it'll work for the Emperor. So, by looking at these three heroes, we can see that essentially, even though that all of their kind of beginnings in the lore were the same, they ultimately do converge in the Runeblade archetype. They use small amounts of arcane damage, they use small amounts of physical damage in order to combine them and make your day a lot harder than you probably thought it was going to be. However, if we take a look at the lore for the Emperor, we can see that his powers are probably a bit different than that. So on the Flesh and Blood website, in the section for Volcor, we can see on the little paragraph for the Emperor that it says, "The Emperor himself possesses the gift of Aether, the most powerful wizard in all Volcor. As a direct descendant of the royal bloodline, he inherited the throne from his father, already well versed in the politics of the court. Shrewd, resourceful, and cunning, he has learned the skills necessary to stay one step ahead of his enemies and retain his grasp on the throne." So there it is. It says right there in black and white or gold and red that he's a wizard, and I think that having him actually perform rune blade style attacks with only small amounts of arcane damage would kind of undermine his position in the grand scheme of wizards of Volcor. He's the top wizard. He should probably be doing top wizard arcane magic attacks. Now we can actually scroll down a little bit further and get a little bit more information on how that Aether actually works in the world of Flesh and Blood, and why I think that the Emperor is definitely going to be leaning towards being a wizard. So in this small excerpt it says, "Unlike the scholars of Solana who draw upon knowledge for their arcane power, for the wizards of Volcor the ability to cast fire is innate. Their arcane gifts usually manifest in childhood, and training begins the moment that their Aether affinity is revealed." So it seems then that through scholarly pursuits that people can actually start using some ethereal magic. If you take a look at Lord Sutcliffe, his entire life it seems was to investigate these claims and try and gain some power of Aether for himself. He was cast out of Solana, started the Demonastery, did the aforementioned rib cracking with Viscerae, and we have the Demonastery and the rune blades that we know today. However, I like to think that through this idea of using runes and taking non Aether affinity folk and doing demonastery things on them, that they don't actually get a full grasp of arcane magic. However, they just allow arcane magic to channel through them using the runes. However, Aether affinity means you're born with that ability. You're able to cast fire from your hands, throw firebolts to Kano things, because he does that. And I think that that's where the Emperor is definitely going to be a wizard. I know I didn't want to just skip over the fact that people thought he was going to be a runeblade. I know some people that I've talked to thought it was going to be obvious that he was a wizard. However, I think that it's nice to kind of put forward these opinions, question what we see, and it ultimately makes for better discussion whenever we're talking about new sets. So let's move on to the other point that James White said, in that we're going to get a new class for the Dynasty set. Now, in my previous lore video talking about Dynasty, I came to the conclusion that either a Necromancer or an Assassin would be the best choice. So if we take a look at more of the promotional images released for Worlds, we can see that there were two sort of other images that were released, one depicting fireworks and the other depicting lanterns rising from what is seemingly Volcor. So with this information and my prediction of the two classes in mind, I think we can further cement how that the Emperor is going to actually fit into the story of Dynasty. I know I'm just fanboying here, but that's what we do. We love Flesh and Blood. There's a new set coming out. It's prime time to get the lore fanfics in. So first, let's take a look at the Assassin. Personally, I think that a very good way of getting this Emperor and this obvious celebration in these images across in Dynasty is to have an Emperor be successfully assassinated and a new Emperor takes his place. If an Assassin was actually to succeed, then we would be able to have an Assassin who essentially has made us respect his power. If we just have an Assassin in there who's in training, it doesn't really feel as powerful as the other heroes, especially a set that's going to include the Emperor. I think it would make a more credible threat to have an Assassin who actually succeeded. Now, if the Emperor that we see in these images is a new Emperor, i.e. an Emperor that has been elected by the courts of Volcor to take over the now vacant Emperor spot, I think it would make sense to have a ceremony in order to swear in the new Emperor, to show off the new Emperor to all of the people of Volcor, and by doing so, they would probably force a party on people, hence the ceremonial garbs, hence all the lanterns, hence all the fireworks. I think that could fit really well, and it would also, again, as I say, give us a reason and a storyline to actually dive into in Dynasty. Now, that's not to say that there isn't just as good of a case to be made for a Necromancer. Now, in the previous video, I also mentioned how that Kano came to be the Drakai of Aether. Long story short, he uncovered a plot where there were seemingly dead and resurrected wizards that were being cloaked in magic so that they would blend in, and they were infiltrating the court of Volcor. Kano managed to uncover this plot, but not the person responsible, and the Emperor then bestowed upon him the title of the Drakai of Aether, as well as giving him the Crucible of Aetherweave. This ultimately could just be a continuation of that story, where we find find out more about who the Necromancer was. I don't know, maybe he succeeds in also killing the Emperor and we have a new Emperor in there. That plotline can fit in both classes. However, it would mean that we can continue on the lore that we were given for Kano and dive further on into the story of the corruption within the court of Volcor. Now, one thing that I will point out is that I have no idea how Icelander fits into this. Ether Affinity has been very closely tied with fire, so I have absolutely no idea how that Icelander fits into all of this as a wizard. So yeah, if you have any theories on that, definitely let me know. Who knows, maybe it's some kind of like alternate ether, like alternate like upside downy, like alternate dimension ether that she's tapping into, like a different I don't know. I haven't quite got my head around it yet. I would love to hear what you guys think. Now, in the same kind of spirit in which I mentioned that the Emperor may not be playable, but we're just gonna assume he is anyway, I'm gonna also assume that these promotional images are further telling of something that's gonna happen in Volcor, and not just party promotional images that are essentially just made to kind of go alongside the party that is going to be the World Championships. I think if we assume that there's something that's going to actually happen in Dynasty, it just makes for a more fun lore discussion. Anyways, that's my ideas on the Emperor of Volcor. I would love to hear your ideas, so if you know more about the lore than I do, which is probably most people that follow Flesh and Blood, I would love to hear what you think down in the comments below. If comments on YouTube are not your thing, you can send me a message over on Twitter. My little Twitter handle should be up on screen now. If you want to support the channel directly, I do have a Patreon, and we are getting close to launching our first wave of Patreon only content. So if that's something you're interested in, head on over to patreon.com/theragaMuffinman and take a look at all the tiers and see if there's anything there that might interest you. And finally, I just want to point out as well that I've recently launched a Discord and it's growing slowly. We're having some chats on there about skirmish at the moment. It's quite fun, and the link will be down in the description below. Anyways, thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you guys next time.